Welcome to the Age is Irrelevant podcast with your host, Helen Fritsch. Helen is a 60-plus, lifelong competitive athlete, flight attendant, published fitness model, writer, IFBB bodybuilding pro, and certified wine specialist who believes that your age is irrelevant to pursue goals, dreams, and desires. Are you a woman in her 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond who still has a burning desire to pursue a dream or a passion? Are you thinking about starting a new chapter in your life, but you're hesitant, thinking that you might be too old or just don't know where to begin? The Age is Irrelevant podcast is a podcast devoted to women who want to defy the odds, smash barriers, and redefine happiness and success after 40. It's time to make a difference. There is no need to dread blowing out that added birthday candle every year. A new movement is slowly taking momentum, where being over the hill just isn't relevant anymore. Age labels are being thrown out the window, and women are rediscovering the strength within themselves to make a difference, not only within their own lives, but also touching and inspiring the lives of other women. Join Helen as she and her guests discuss all aspects of aging after 40 and how to make the aging process and those twilight years more rewarding, exciting, and fun.
Hello, and welcome to the Age is Irrelevant podcast. I'm your host, Helen Fritsch, and this is episode number 89. Now, today I'm speaking with 83 and a half, as she will mention in the podcast, year-old Karmela Waldman. Now, Karmela is a Holocaust survivor, a licensed marriage therapist, and she's the co-host with her son Joel on the Surviving the Survivor podcast. Born in Yugoslavia in 1939, a few short years later, the Nazis appeared at Karmela's front door and took her father away. Karmela and her mother escaped through a hole in the fence in her backyard and were forced to separate. Karmela was taken to a convent and hidden there for 6 months until the Russians liberated Belgrade. She was reunited with her mother only to find out that her father and other members of her family were killed in Auschwitz in Poland at the concentration camp there. She talks about life as a Holocaust survivor, her childhood in the convent, and her schooling, and how she met her husband, and what she's doing today, and how all of this has affected her life. I hope you enjoy the podcast as much as I enjoyed interviewing her. Here we go.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor for me too.
Oh, that's wonderful. So for my listeners, I am speaking to 83 and a half year old Karmela Waldman, who is a Holocaust survivor. I was thrilled when one of her people, quote unquote, reached out to me, telling me that she would be a great guest on my show, and I agreed 1,000%. So welcome to the show. We're all going to be really anxious to hear your story. And I like to start off in the beginning. So why don't you talk about your early childhood, because that was very influential with your story, and tell us where you were born and just kind of take us through your early childhood.
Okay. I was born right on the border between Hungary and what used to be Yugoslavia, which, by the way, doesn't exist anymore. I was born in 1939, August of 1939, and World War II broke out in September 1939. So it was a very poor choice of timing. It's a small town. It was on the Yugoslav side when I was born, and what can I tell you? It became Hungary later on, and today it's part of Serbia. So I was actually born in 3 different places.
Interesting history note for sure. So tell us about.
It is an unusual, but very usual for that part of Europe.
So being a young child in June, I think, of 1944, what happened?
Well, before that, we were put into what they called the ghetto. that's a restricted area of town where they put all the Jews. It was probably administratively easier for them to collect everybody once they prepared the cattle trains to take people to the concentration camp in Poland. That's where they took the Jews from this area. And as you can see, it was late in the war when even some parts of Europe were already liberated, but we weren't so lucky. And what happened was that on the morning that they came to take us to the cattle trains, there was a special merchandise train station. There was the regular train station. This was a little out of town. And they were taking us there. And my father turned to my mother and said to her, her name was Vera, he says, Vera, do something, do something. Prior to this, he refused to do anything because he studied in Germany before World War II, and he was still thinking that the Germans are a civilized people. And he still was believing that the worst thing that they will take us to labor camps and nothing else would happen. Why would they take a 5-year-old child is not clear to me, but that's what he was saying to my mother. In the meantime, my mother obtained from the relatives in Budapest, she obtained false documents. They were also hiding, and they found somebody who would give them false identity papers, but my father refused to make a move. The morning that they were there to pick us up, to put us on the train to the concentration camp, he started to get very nervous and was begging my mother to take me and save me. My mother took me by my hand, and in the back of the house, it was like a little private house, and in the back of it, there was a gate to get out of, like there was a main entrance and there was a gate in the back. And my mother just walked out holding my hand. I was almost 5. And she started to march with me towards the other part of the town where an eye doctor, a Christian eye doctor, lived. And he was always working with my father because my father was in a related business. He had an optician store, and in Germany he studied how to make lenses. So this Dr. Ivo Scherzer, a Croatian eye doctor, he said to my father, if I ever can help you, don't hesitate to call me. So my mother decided, and she walked to his place and knocked on the door, and he opened the door. And he let us in. It was in the very early morning because they took everybody around 6 o'clock in the morning to the freight station. So it was early. And he took us in. He had a wife and 2 little girls. And he lived in his own home. And he let us come in. And then there were no phones at that point in this town, really. And he walked over to the convent. He was one of the benefactors of one of the local convents where the nuns lived. And he went over and asked the nuns if they would take me in. And the nun superior said, she was also a Croat. And she knew Dr. Scherzer, and she said she would take me in, but I can only come over at night when it's dark. So we waited the whole day at Dr. Scherzer's. And when it was dark out, my mother and Dr. Scherzer and I walked over to these nuns. And my mother left me there. And And I was very precocious at that time because I was surrounded by all grown-ups. I had no siblings. And I allegedly, according to everybody's story, Dr. Scherzer's and my mother's and the nun, I started to scream at the top of my lungs that a mother that loves her child doesn't leave her with strangers. But she left me there. And for about 6 months, I lived with these nuns. And they were very nice to me, very good to me. They assigned one of the nuns whose job was really to take care of me. And the nun superior was a very unusual person. She played the piano and sang, and she was a very joyous person. Her name was Matilda Gorichanets. Matilda Gorichanets. And thanks to these righteous Gentiles, I was not taken on the train, because if I would have been taken on the train, I guarantee that I would have gone right into the gas chambers and would be killed. All the children went straight with their mothers to the gas chambers. My father, who was an optimist by nature, he walked over to a German soldier when they landed. He was 34 years old. When they arrived with the train, he walked over to a German soldier and he told him in perfect German, since he studied there for 4 years, he said, I have a skill that I can offer. I know how to chisel lenses for eyeglasses. And in the very same moment, the soldier put him in the line for the gas chamber. There were two lines. Always when the trains arrived, there were two lines. They would put in forced labor. The other one they would put in the gas chamber. So they put my father in the gas chamber immediately. And my grandfather, who traveled there with him, didn't know where that line would go. And he joined my father in the line. There were witnesses from our town who signed and testified that my father was killed in the gas chamber. They saw it all happen. And then my grandfather also got killed that way, gassed. They pretend like they give you a shower and they let the gas come out instead of the shower. Okay, I went into gruesome detail. After 6 months, my mother was hearing that I'm very pale, that I am not looking well. She got very anxious, and my mother bribed a relative of a person who worked for my father in his store. And this relative worked for the trains, and he brought me up. She gave him a gold chain and something else. I don't know exactly now what else she gave him, but she gave him, and it was only a 2-hour train trip. And he went to the nuns. He got me and took me up to my mother.
Mm-hmm. A very joyous reunion, I'm sure.
The irony of life, that just at that moment, and this relative worked for the trains, and he brought me up. She gave him a gold chain and something else. I don't know exactly now what else she gave him, but she gave him, and it was only a 2-hour train trip. And he went to the nuns. He got me and took me up to my mother.
Mm-hmm. A very joyous reunion, I'm sure.
The irony of life, that just at that moment, pardon me?
I said
Pardon me? I didn't hear it. I'm sorry. What did you say?
I said a very joyous
reunion. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. So the man brought me up to my mother, and the irony is that literally that week, the Russians, who were then allies with the Americans, and the in the town of Budapest, where my mother was hiding, which was the capital of Hungary, in that town, the Helen,
Yes,
you
yeah.
back?
I'm here. I'm back. Yes, I'm here.
It's not okay.
Yes, there we go.
So we were at the point of the Russians were allies with the Americans, and the Germans were inside the city of Budapest, and the Russians started bombardments and so on and so forth. So there were snipers, there were shootings, there was hunger, and this lasted for another 50 days. I just Googled it recently because I was asked to compare my experience with what the Ukrainians have, what the experience the Ukrainians have today. So I Googled it, and the siege of Budapest during World War II, you can Google it and you will see what we went through during that siege. And then we were liberated by the Russians. And I don't know if you want me to go into detail about it.
Yes, please.
But anyway, then we went back to our... Well, first of all, there was famine in Budapest, and this was like end of February, March. And at this point, we started to go back to my hometown, which is 2 hours away by train, and took us almost 2 weeks to get by foot, by some truck. Somebody stopped with a truck and let us for a few hours. We slept a few nights in a peasant's house, and on and on. And finally, we got back to Subotica, which is the town I come from in Yugoslavia. And it's a town of 100,000 people. And we got back to this town. And that's when we found out that my grandfather and father were killed. And then my mother married a very nice man whose pregnant wife and 8-year-old son were also gassed in Auschwitz and killed and cremated the bodies. And the two of them got married, and they had a little girl, my sister. And then I went to high school, and then I went to college and met my husband, who is an American. And I was married to him for 62 years. And I'm still married to him, but he's now very, very, very sick. That's why I guess I made a Freudian slip and put it in the past tense, because he's in a very bad shape. But for 62 years, I was very happy with him. I have 2 children. We have 2 children and 8 grandchildren. I became a social worker. I have a master's in social work. He is a doctor and a psychiatrist. And part of the time I did all sorts of things in social work, school, hospital, mental health clinic. And then part of the time I worked with my husband. And so I always say I want to be identified only by the Holocaust. I would like to be identified by being, a mother, a social worker, a friend, and so forth. So I'm, as you mentioned, 83 and 7 months old.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was about 81, my son and he lives in Miami, and because of COVID, we were both doesn't live with me, but he lives nearby. And he was not busy because of COVID. and I was not busy because of my age. And so he asked me if I would like to do a podcast with him. And I don't know if you are aware of this, that we've been doing a podcast for over 2 years now, 2 years.
I saw that you were doing a podcast. Yes.
Yes. And the title of the podcast is Surviving the Survivor, because I, implying that I'm not an easy mother to live with. So he's very happy if he survives me.
Oh, that's funny. I'm sure you guys have a lot of fun bantering back and forth on the show.
That's exactly what it looks like. But just very recently, in the last 2 or 3 months, I make this joke that I took an early retirement, because now he's on his own, doing a program that he's really doing well. And my husband is sick and I have to run there. So once a week on Sunday nights, I do a podcast with my son at 7:00 in the evening. It's Surviving the Survivor on YouTube. And I enjoyed tremendously those 2 years, because he even made up like little cups for coffee. I said to him, you know what, I live in a condominium, but I made the quip that he's taking me out of the nursing home. You know, these Miami condominiums are like waiting rooms for death or something. So he was like, taking me out, kind of airing me out,
Airing you out.
I drive. So I'm not that stuck here, but it's not that bad either. It just so happens in our building, there are a lot of young people who live here and a lot of Latinos, and they make the place very cheerful, and it's a good place.
Oh, that's awesome. That's wonderful.
So, but still, it was very, very nice and rewarding to do this Surviving the Survivor podcast with him. And we had a very large number. We only did it once a week in a professional studio, a recording studio. And because my son, prior to this, he was for about 25 years a reporter and then a correspondent on television, so that he's a perfectionist, so that we did it in a very professional manner as far as the execution of the podcast. Lately, he is doing it in his own little studio, and he's doing it every single day.
Wow.
Which I wouldn't be able to, even if he invited me, which he didn't. He's very successful on his own. So I do still once a week with him. And we do some of the crime stories. And my son always loved, true crime.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of get spooked at. I like romantic comedies better,
mm-hmm.
But I look at these crime stories from a psychological perspective. I analyze them from a psychological perspective. And we have a sort of a following, a very nice group of people who listen to us and who watch us and who write feedback, which is very nice. And very happy I'm very happy that he's now on his own and doing great. He has what he calls his producer, is his very good friend of time, who is a master booker, books,
Mm-hmm.
People who are knowledgeable, who are experts on the particular topic, and the two of them do a great job together. I don't know what else would you like to
Well, I would like to ask you some things about your, growing up during all this. Looking back on your life, are there things that you don't like to talk about, or that memories that you kind of suppress?
I told you the story about my father.
Mm-hmm.
My father, I considered him a pathological optimist. Let me explain that he was too optimistic. He thought even at that point when he got to Auschwitz that he could, communicate with the soldiers and that he could explain himself and I have inherited some of that optimism, which can be very good, but can be also harmful. Being over optimistic,
Mm-hmm.
and the way I deal with life is, I think I suppress and repress a lot of the negatives and try to focus on the positives, which is still repressing. No matter how you slice it, you're still repressing things.
Right.
So, you still are avoiding painful emotions and so forth. I think that's one of the, well, there are a lot of negative consequences to what happened. Not necessarily the way I deal with life so far. Because I have had a very smart, supportive, caring, loving husband. And all these years, 62 years, from the age of, I got married, I got to know him when I was 20, and I got married to him when I was 22. And he's 6 years older than I am.
Mm-hmm.
So that helped me deal with he was like the expression, he had my back emotionally. Mm-hmm. The term,
yes.
have your back.
Yes.
He had my back, and I also was in a field. First of all, I was married to a shrink, and then I was in a field where you deal a lot with emotions and understanding their behaviors and their psyche and so forth. So I had to look at myself a little bit, but I didn't overstretch or overstress with that. I think the person who had more difficulty than I growing up, who was born after the war, like 9 years after, almost 10 years after me, and her father lost a child already, and my mother was already older, and she had it somehow harder than I did.
Well, I'm sure also too, with you being Jewish and then you're put into this Catholic convent, I'm guessing I'm guessing the nuns are teaching you Catholic prayers and you're going to Mass. So how did that, with you being so young, how did that affect you later?
That saved our lives. Because I had my grandmother, my grandmother's sister, and aunt, my mother, and myself. Okay, together. We were together, and we had to. When I was hiding with them in Budapest, those 50 days of bombardment, we all had to go down to the basement because of the bombardment. And all the people around us were not Jewish. And we were pretending like we weren't Jewish. Mm-hmm. And I had a very strong identity. I remember this vividly. I knew who I was. And I just now, when my grandchildren children are about 5.5, I observe them. And they also know who they are. I had a very strong Jewish identity before the war, before the nuns, and very strong Jewish identity after the nuns. And I learned all the prayers because I was a clever little, now I wouldn't know, but then I knew them all. And in the evening, I would kneel down in front of 4 people could bring a bed down into this huge, huge basement to hide during the bombardment and sleep at night when it was dark in this basement. And I would kneel down and it was open. Imagine everybody together. I would say in very loud voice all the Christian prayers that I knew. Well, the Christian prayers that I knew that you say before you go to sleep. And so nobody had a doubt that we were Christians. I knew I was doing this as a pretense, and I knew who I was. I knew that I couldn't call my mother. I had to call her what she had on the false document, the name that she had on the false document, which was Miss Aranka, Aranka Neni. And they tell me I never messed up. I never slipped off, and called her something else. So my Jewish identity was strong before the war. I was there for 6 months. My mother and I maintained a very close relationship with both Dr. Scherzer and the nuns, but my identity was never in turmoil or in question.
That's really amazing. That's really amazing.
It's the truth. I mean, I know, as a matter of fact, sometimes I'm thinking a normal person would change during a lifetime, certain things.
Yes.
But I never changed my Jewish identity.
Right.
And my husband was from Brooklyn, and he was very much with me on this. And this was not a problem for me, because I know some people. I have a very close, who passed away now, but a very close friend who was raised by Christians. And then when her mother reappeared, she really didn't want to go back with her mother.
Oh wow.
Yeah, her name was Bruria. Yeah. So there are all sorts of variations and varieties, but this is how I was, and this is how I am.
That's in your entire past has molded who you are today, which is very commendable for you to be able to, speak to people like me about your story, and then also have this podcast with your son to, share parts of your life, because it's important. And I see now, with the climate being today in certain areas of our country that, they don't want to young children or children in general to learn about history of different ethnicities and different heritages, which is wrong, because it makes the world who we are today. So, you getting your story out there, especially to young people, is very important. I mean, your grandchildren, how old are they? And do they know about your past?
Well, my son is a late bloomer, and the one we have only 2 children. My son is a late bloomer, and he married late in life. So,
okay,
first a beautiful wife, younger than him, and he has 3 children: an almost 9-year-old, almost. She will be 9 in June. A 7-year-old and almost 4-year-old. And the other day, the 9-year-old heard somewhere the word Holocaust, not from me, from somebody else, and she was saying something. Grandma was in the Holocaust, and her 7-year-old sister said, "What's a Holocaust?"
Mhm.
So we just kind of didn't go there and didn't, and the almost 4-year-old doesn't even know yet anything. So, but my daughter has 5 daughters.
Wow.
My daughter, and she is what they call modern Orthodox. I don't know if you heard the term, modern Orthodox.
Yes.
Anyway, she is by profession a doctor, a medical doctor. And one of her daughters is a doctor. And then one went to MIT. You heard of MIT?
Yes.
Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It's a good school. And then one went to Barnard, Columbia. One is going to Binghamton College, and one is still in high school. So she has very high achievers, very smart girls, and very. They were raised in private schools in a Jewish private school, and they are very traditional in that sense. They are very modern and they know everything and they talk about everything. but they're also traditional as far as they are more traditional than I as far as religion. I'm very identified, but I am not religiously that identified. Religiously, I'm kind of on the conservative, reform, conservative. We always belong to a conservative synagogue. Judaism is very multifaceted. There are many, many variations on lump, but there are the very Orthodox, the totally secular, the ones who don't even know what they are. There are all sorts of variations on Judaism. Where did you grow up?
I actually grew up, I was born in Pennsylvania, and then we moved to Texas with my father's job. As a matter of fact, my father was born and raised in Brooklyn also.
Oh, that's interesting.
And my father has passed away about 5 years ago, but he was born in 1933. So he was in Brooklyn basically, the same time as your husband. So, I mean,
my husband was born in 1933.
Oh, he was? He was?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I'm sure they probably hung out at the same places. I mean, for all I know, they may have even known each other.
Well, I tell you, I have a funny story. My husband was born in Brooklyn and he had allergies. And the doctor advised his mother in 1938-9 to move to the Bronx. It's on a higher altitude and better for allergies. It's a true story. So the family moved to the Bronx.
Oh my gosh, they moved. Oh, that's hilarious. That's very, very funny.
Because of the allergy. And he always went back to Brooklyn to the dentist. Traveled alone on the subway when he was 6, 7. In those days, it was safe to travel alone.
It was. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Do you know where your husband lived growing up in Brooklyn? Like the streets?
No, unfortunately, I don't.
Okay.
I don't know that. I know that in the Bronx, he always talked about, because that's where when he was a little older, like social life, friends. He even had till now he has friends. Well, they died, but they widows. A bunch of friends from the Bronx. But I don't think he has friends from Brooklyn that he playing ball in the street and stuff like that.
Right.
Started when he moved to the Bronx, and then he went to school in the Bronx, and so he has all these friends that. There were 8 or 9 of them that we always met with and so forth. He had this big group of friends. What else happened? I have a very, basically, I have a very uneventful, normal life in the sense. We lived like for 36 years in Highland Park, New Jersey, not that far from Pennsylvania. And then we moved to be closer to my daughter. We moved to West Orange. I don't know if you heard of West
Yeah,
Orange.
I sure do. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. And you also, you were also a marriage therapist, counselor. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have a funny story to tell you about that. I don't tell it like routinely, but my husband was a psychiatrist. I have a master's in social work, and I did some additional training. And we each had an office, and we shared the waiting room. And when my husband had marriage counseling cases, sometimes we did marriage counseling together with the couple. In other words, my husband and I and the couple.
Oh,
And one time we had an argument, and we really got into our own personal argument in front of the couple. We were and I turned to them and I said, "We are just demonstrating how to argue constructively." But yes, because we were really arguing. And it was very hard to argue with him because he's a very sweet person. And I did marriage counseling. I did family therapy. Expression dysfunctional family.
right.
Dysfunctional family. So every family is dysfunctional. I came to this conclusion, one way or another. Nobody is perfectly functional family.
I think you're 100% correct on that.
Nobody's perfectly perfect.
If people wanted to follow you, are you on social media at all, like Facebook or anything like that? Are you on social media?
If I am?
Are you?
Yes.
Are you on? Okay.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you this. I'm also slightly paranoid. So what I did, I put my husband on the social media and I used his social media thing and not my own. But one day I Googled and I saw that there is a lot of stuff about me on Google.
There is. I actually Googled you, and there are a lot of things about you. So I know.
Yeah, I was shocked. I didn't know that. So that's like I'm aware that I'm slightly paranoid, but it doesn't stop me from loving people I don't trust people 100%. That's also part of the Holocaust story. I don't trust people 100%, but I'm really a very people person. So I really enjoy people very much. And I'm trying to be helpful to people as a therapist when I was a therapist.
Well, and
once upon a time.
I can imagine with everything that's happened to you in your lifetime, that's a beautiful foundation to actually help others to deal with tragedy. And
right now you are buffering.
Oh, okay. I know this internet connection is not good at all. Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Yes, I can hear you. Okay. I can hear you.
I was just saying that with your background and everything that's happened to you and being a therapist, I'm sure this helps you understand and empathize with people who are going through tragedy and loss, for sure.
I think that in all modesty, I think I have empathy towards people. I care about people, genuinely care, and that comes across.
It comes across to me. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, I do care about people. I do care about people. Like now I'm worried about how many hours will you be able to sleep considering that you had a rough day?
Oh, I'm used to it. I've been a flight attendant for 37 years, so it's all good. I'm pretty set in my ways, and sleep is very important to me since I had to get up this morning at 3:30 and yesterday morning at 2 a.m. So I'm used to it. It's all good. But I do want to thank you.
Wait a minute, I have to ask this. Do you or you want? Let's finish and then I'll ask you because I'm curious about this. Okay.
Okay. I just wanted to say that if people go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, we're finishing up on our interview. And so I just wanted to let our listeners know that they could find you. Do you mind sharing your husband's Facebook page so they could, maybe, take a look? Is your husband on Facebook?
My husband is on Facebook, but they can get me through Surviving the Survivor.
Okay.
Surviving the Survivor, the
podcast.
The podcast, wherever you got me,
right.
They can get there.
Okay. Yes, I'm sure I'm going to have people who will definitely want to hear more of you and your story and your experiences.
Yeah, and all feedback is welcome, even the negative one.
I don't see too much negative feedback coming your way, but good to know. Good to know. Well, Karmela, thank you again for sharing your story. It's been very compelling. I haven't had a guest like you on my show, so I'm very excited to put it out there to the public and let everyone hear your side of the story and where you are today. It's been an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, and good luck to you with this work. Us older people need an advocate because our society still looks down upon aging.
Yes.
And I think we need to prove to people that they're still around and doing everything that the younger people are doing, maybe not jumping, maybe not running, but other than that, we are here.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And that's why I have this podcast to let people know when I interview people like you that, life still goes on and you can thrive, later in life.
Definitely. Definitely.
All right. You have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I sure hope you enjoyed hearing Karmela's story. I do want to apologize for some of the dead space in the interview. I was in a hotel room on a layover, and the internet at that hotel was really bad, and I actually lost her several times. I was able to edit a lot of the dead space out, but there was just this one spot that was not being cooperative, so I just had to leave it in. So what I loved about this story is that it's a perfect example of resilience, determination, and the willpower to survive during horrible circumstances. Karmela never lost sight of who she was or her heritage. There are so many times in life where we can literally get lost. It can be so overwhelming, but like Karmela, accepting her situation at a young age and taking a one day at a time approach, she eventually found happiness again, reuniting with her mother. If you would like more information about Karmela, I highly recommend you head over to her podcast, Surviving the Survivor, which you can find on iTunes or Google Play. You can find me at ageisirrelevant.com. You can also find me and email me at helen@ageisirrelevant.com. Thank you so much for your patronage. Please share this podcast if you know someone who also might relate to it. Thank you for being a listener. And again, never forget, age truly is irrelevant in anything that you do. Take care. Bye-bye.